You're listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonika Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast. This is Christian Peterson talking. I'll be your host today, and today we are going to talk about money. Money is one of the topics that, in relationships, couples fight about the most. We often, as individuals, have strong values and opinions about money, and when we don't have enough of it, it activates our survival fears, and once that happens and we've gotten good and scared, it's hard to think straight and make good decisions. And often, of course, when two individuals come together in a couple and we have to make important decisions about how we allocate our money, how we make our money, how we spend our money, how we save our money or not, all kinds of breakdowns happen. I have heard experts say that fights over money is the number one reason for divorce. I haven't been able to actually verify that statement, but I do know for a fact that a ton of arguments, fighting, and breakdowns do happen around money. In this episode, I'm going to offer you 5 important ideas to help with your money conversations. And I want to be totally clear that in this episode, I'm not going to be offering a full background or a full set of skills that are required to cover this entire topic. Sonika and I already offer a whole workshop on conflict resolution, which we actually did just this last weekend. And we're seriously considering offering an entire weekend workshop just on the topic of money, because there are so many facets and aspects to the conversation around money and to the topic of money. Now, I want to start out by telling you a cautionary tale that Sonika and I affectionately call just the boat story between us. Early on in our work, we had a young couple that attended one of our workshops, and they were telling us this story. This was a young family with 2 young children, and they didn't have a lot of discretionary income. Now, in this family, the husband, he really wanted a boat. He wanted a boat with a passion. But the wife said, she would really like to use any extra income they had to start a 401k and begin to save up for retirement and, just get the whole idea of saving and retirement building on the road, so to speak. And they couldn't really agree on what to do. So one day, the husband, he went out and bought a boat, a pretty big boat. As you can imagine, that caused a huge breakdown, and she was livid. And the result was that now they had this boat sitting in their driveway, took up most of the space in their driveway, but they didn't actually have enough money to take it to the lake or to fill it with gasoline or to pay the fees around it, so they couldn't really use it for anything. But they still had this boat sitting in the driveway. And this boat that was sitting in their driveway became this monument that they had to look. They would see it every time they looked out their window. They would pass it every time they went in and out of their house. And it became this monument to the failure of getting on the same page around money. It became this, a thorn in their side that hurt every time they looked at it. So it's a cautionary tale, because that's what not to do around money. And it's a great example of what can happen when we don't take the time or we don't have the skills to set ourselves up for success around our money decisions. And I want to say when big breakdowns like this have already happened, a different set of skills are required. There's a big mess to be cleaned up, which can absolutely be done. And it's beyond the scope of this particular podcast episode to deal with that. But if you find yourself in a situation like that, by all means, reach out for support. Use someone like coaches like us or friends you trust to get something like that cleaned up. On the group coaching call we do for our relationship mastery program last week, there was a couple who brought up the topic of money. And I want to use that as an example that we can work with throughout this episode. In this case, the man was talking about how he got frustrated and triggered because she, on a couple of occasions, have presented him with surprise bills that he felt he didn't have any choice but to pay. See, there was a bill for something that happened overseas, and he thought he had already paid it, but she came back and said, no, we still need to pay it because it didn't get fixed the first time, and now it needs to be paid again, and he was really frustrated about that. And he gave another example of another time when she was leaving to go on a trip of some sort, that she had this big several $1,000s expense bill that he felt he had no choice but to pay, even though it made basically emptied his savings. She then added to the conversation that she really didn't know what else to do, and that he had made it clear when they first were pregnant and were about to have a child that he didn't want her to work, and they had the agreement that she would stay home and take care of the kid and he would do the breadwinning. And now here they were, both feeling mad and frustrated about what to do and how to move forward. So I'm gonna offer you 5 ideas that are really useful for conversations around money. Actually, these are useful for a conversation about any topic, really, but in this particular case, we're going to stick with money. Now, the first very big idea and really important step to take is to slow it down. You got to slow your conversation down enough that you can sort out the odds and ends and figure out who said what and what you're actually thinking. Often when the topic is money, we tend to get triggered. We get frustrated and angry and scared about not having enough of it. And once our fear or anger has been activated, it's really difficult to have a productive conversation and to actually sort out how we can move forward. So the first step is to slow it down. And the next step, the second one, comes right along with it, is to check out your makeups, or you could say check out your assumptions. And why we say that is all of us have a lot of assumptions or beliefs, we call them makeups, about money. And if you're my partner, I often make up all kinds of things about you and about our money. For example, in this case, the man, he might be making up that she is just frivolously presenting him with bills that should have been taken care of and that there was no need for that bill to even exist in the first place. So one way to check out a makeup or to check out an assumption is to say something like, hey, honey, I notice I'm making up that you could have dealt with this bill a long time ago and you simply failed to do it because, I don't know, I'm making up that you don't care enough about money or you just think we have enough of it. And now you're coming back and presenting me with the bill for a second time. Could you tell me your side of this story? Because I know I tend to make up stuff, and I know sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it might not be. I'd really love to hear where you're coming from around this. So you simply get a little curious, check out your makeups. Don't assume that your first thoughts or your second or third thoughts are accurate about what happened or about your partner's motivations. So that's the second thing, is check out your makeups and your assumptions with your partner. The third idea here is to get clear about your agreements. Just because you think it's an agreement that you have doesn't mean your partner thinks it's an agreement. Doesn't mean they are operating under that assumption. So whatever you may or may not have agreed to in the past, it's a really good idea to reevaluate what you want to agree on moving forward. Like from now on, moving forward, what do we actually agree on? In the example I just mentioned, she thought it was an agreement they had that she couldn't work, actually that he didn't want her to work, and she was just going to take care of their child and he was going to do all the breadwinning. Now, if they want to set up their life like that, great. And that, when we checked in with him, he wasn't so sure that that is actually how it went down and what they had agreed on. So it might, in one person's mind, be an agreement or something that's like a rule, where in the other person's mind, it's totally not. And the only way to discover what you're actually agreeing on is kind of get it on the table. So one way you can do that is both of you can like make a little list, or you could just talk it out of, here's what I think our operating money agreements are. And the other person does the same thing. Here's what I think our operating money agreements are. And then you compare them. And if they're all the same and you're on the same page, wonderful. But most likely you're going to find that several of them you're not on the same page about. And of course, going back to the first idea about slowing it down, you have to slow the conversation down enough that you can actually do what I just suggested, so you can get clear about, okay, here's what we would like to agree on. And maybe it made sense 6 or 7 years ago when your child was born that one person would stay home and the other one would do the breadwinning. But now perhaps the situation is different. Now perhaps you can both go to work, or you can find a way for one of you to work half-time and the other person works full-time. There are so many options you can come up with, but you can only do that if you get clear about what you actually want and what your agreements are gonna be moving forward. The fourth idea I'll share here is to look for the deeper motivation. Whenever you want anything, there's always a deeper motivation, a so that. We often call it a so that. For instance, let's say you want to stop using credit cards in your family. Why do you want that? You want to stop using credit cards so that what? You might say, so that we can save more money. Okay, great. There's a deeper motivation behind that. Why do you want to save money? So that what? You might say, so that we'll have some funds for emergency expenses. Okay, great. Why do you want to have some funds for emergency expenses? So that what? So that I can rest easy at night, so I can feel safe and relaxed. When you keep following the thread of so that, you always end up finding that there's a deeper motivation, and the deepest motivation for all of us in any decision we're trying to make is basically an internal feeling, a sensation we produce for ourselves inside when we imagine having the outcome. So for example, when my first outcome I imagine is we should stop using credit cards. When I follow the thread down, really what I want, my deepest motivation, is so that I can feel safe and relaxed. And that's true for all the topics around money. Why do you want one of you to stay home and one of you to work? Why do you want to save more money or to spend more money? Why do you want to use credit cards or not use credit cards? Why do you want a boat as opposed to putting money into a 401k? If you follow these threads, you arrive at what is the deepest feeling motivation. And once you do that, you can say, well, really what I want is I want to feel safe and relaxed. Now you can reverse engineer your decisions to say, okay, well, really what I want is for me and for us to feel safe and relaxed. How do we set up our money in a way that I feel safe and relaxed, that we can feel safe and relaxed? And you'll often be surprised at the new solutions that are possible when you start from that place, as opposed to starting from, which is what often happens, I see too many credit card bills, I panic, my fear kicks in, and all I can think about is just shutting down the goddamn credit cards and shutting down your use of the credit cards. And, off we are to the races, and this is how arguments get started. So look for the deeper motivation. Find the deepest so that behind what it is you desire to do with your money. The fifth and last idea I'll offer you on today's episode is to take the time to get on the same page before you make any significant purchases or any significant decisions around money. That's why I told you the boat story when we started here. That's a perfect example of what happens, what can happen when you don't take the time to get on the same page before you make any significant purchases. Sonica and I have an operating agreement. This is one of the ones we absolutely agree on, both of us, that we don't go out and make any significant purchases without being on the same page about it. And we're okay if it takes a little while for us to arrive at being on the same page. And we've had this example many times. For example, last time we wanted to buy a new car. Sonica wanted, well, that was her starting point. She wanted something that was either electric or hybrid and, small, because, Sonica, in case you don't know, Sonica is a foot shorter than I am. She's not a very big person. And so she felt good in a car like that. I, on the other hand, had an idea of, something that was kind of fun to drive, that had a little muscle, that was big enough for my 6'2" frame and I could stretch out in. And when you look at it on the surface, those two aren't easily satisfied, both of them. And, when I just went and tried out cars, I would gravitate towards much larger vehicles. And when Sonica sat in those, she felt like she was a doll in a truck. They were like way too big. And, when I first went to try out Sonica's, the first car she would suggest, I felt like crammed and it was boring to drive. But since we had this operating agreement of we don't make any purchases like that before we find something we both can feel really good about. And we are okay if it takes a little time before that happens. So we just waited out. We kept talking about, well, what is my deeper motivation? What is my so that in wanting a car that's fun to drive or big or has a little muscle? And for Sonica, what's your deeper motivation in wanting one that's smaller and maybe a hybrid or something like that? And we just played with that. And then lo and behold, at some point we visited a dealership and we found a car that just fit perfectly our needs. It's fun. Has good mileage and it's not terribly huge, but it's big enough that I can stretch out. It's got some fun, some fun and punch to it. And we were both very satisfied. We're just happy with it. And that's the positive opposite version of the boat story. Now, of course, I say before we make any significant investments, you get to say if you have a money limit to that. It might be, depending on your money situation, it might be anything that's more than $100, or it might be anything that's more than $10,000. We don't stop and ask each other every time we want to buy a cup of coffee. It's not like that, but it's the things that have an impact on our common economy and on our finances. For those kinds of purchases, we just can't recommend it enough that you take the time to go through the process to get on the same page. Sometimes that's one of the things you need to learn some extra skills about, get some education around. Like I said, we do a whole workshop on conflict resolution, and that's a good example. Like any conflict often starts out with us being on opposite or at least not on the same page, and we want to find out a way to get on the same page. So those are my ideas for you. In summary, number 1, slow it down. Number 2, check out your makeups or your assumptions with your partner. Number 3, get clear about your agreements. What are you actually agreeing to? Number 4, look for the deeper motivation. Look for the deeper so that. And number 5, get on the same page before you make any significant purchases or investments. All right, friends, that is all for today. I really hope that is useful for you in your money conversations. Thanks for joining me here today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
You've been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your host, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. If you found this valuable, please hit the share button and share with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or your other favorite hangouts. You can find more about Sonica and Christian's work at loveworksforyou.com.